Good afternoon, or at least it is afternoon while I speak on this day. And my cam is still jumping around and I still haven't gotten a new one. So I'm going to forge ahead, and if it gets out of focus or jumps around, just ignore that. Because I want to talk some more about Beowulf and some of the aspects of the era and of the culture that apply to the tale are exemplified in the story, which some of you might not be familiar with. So I'm going to forge ahead, as I already said, and I'm going to start with talking about an issue that is not only important in this poem, but is also important in Gawain when we begin to read that next week. And that is the aspect of loyalty or comitatus. And loyalty in any era is an important aspect, not just in the Anglo-Saxon era, but it is extremely important then because the Anglo-Saxons were under a constant barrage of invasions and fighting with other people, which of course ended in 1066 with the Battle of Hastings, when the Normans and William the Conqueror did conquer the Anglo-Saxons and put an end to the Anglo-Saxon rule and instituted aspects of Norman culture. And as I think I'm pretty sure that I noted in another announcement, also outlawed the language, the speaking and writing of Anglo-Saxon, which is a tactic that conquering nations often do because it strips the indigenous people of their identity and forces them to assimilate into the new culture. And having said that, the Anglo-Saxons were not indigenous to the British Isles. Neither were the Romans. The Picts, yeah, and the Celts, yes, to a certain extent, because the Celts were all over Europe at one time. And as a matter of fact, in the Christian scriptures, the Galatians were Celts. That's where we get the name Gaelic for their language. But I digress, and I'm going to get back to Beowulf. Now, Beowulf is extremely loyal and exemplifies comitatus in his dealings with Hrothgar. Hrothgar, number one, is not his king, though comitatus usually applies to a king and of course to one's peers, and it usually is an association with the military, but anybody can demonstrate comitatus or loyalty. But he is extremely loyal to Hrothgar. Why? Well, because Hrothgar had aided Beowulf's father decades past, and Beowulf was repaying that kindness. And so he was all for Hrothgar. And we even see, and I never can pronounce her name correctly, but Hrothgar's queen, Willithrow, I'm not even going to try again, I'm going to refer to her as Hrothgar's queen, is a little bit worried about Beowulf after he fights Grendel and defeats Grendel's mother, and Hrothgar says, I'm going to adopt you, Beowulf. This puts Hrothgar's wife's children into a perhaps subservient position, and so she asked Beowulf, treat these sons well, and he will because he is going to be loyal. Now, having said that, he has no need to want to be king of Hrothgar's country. And remember, Beowulf is a Geat. He is what is now would be known as Sweden, from Sweden. And the poem is not Anglo-Saxon in its characters or where it takes place. But he becomes king later, so he really has no need of Hrothgar's kingdom. But he demonstrates this loyalty. Okay, I'm hesitant to say this because you should have already have posted your explication on the board, but it can be an indication of an analysis of the second part that maybe I shouldn't make, but I'm going to anyway. At the end of the poem, Beowulf dies. And he dies in part because all of his men except for Wiglaf, and I suppose that will be pronounced Wiglaf in Sweden, all the Wiglaf run away from him and do not come to his aid. Now it is true, Beowulf is old, he's an old man now, but he might not have died if his men had stayed with him and it helped him fight the dragon. So we see an instance of where loyalty is thrown out the window and dire events happen. Also, Comitatus was extremely important in this era because there were so many factions, kings fighting kings, people coming in from other countries trying to usurp the power of the kings who were in an Anglo-Saxon England. And so remaining loyal meant that that king was going to be able to better hold on to his power. So this was an element within Beowulf, and it's also an element within Gawain, whereas Gawain, or Gawain, I was taught to say Gawain, but it seemed like everybody else said Gawain, and I started to say it. Gawain was very loyal to Arthur, but that's getting ahead of the fact. And I also wanted to talk about the issue of honor. Loyalty and honor were both extremely important in the era and in later eras as well, in that the warrior or the hero, and remember, hero and warrior are not synonymous. Warriors are not always heroes, even though heroes are almost always warriors in one sense or another. But the issue of honor is very important, and we see this in Beowulf, where Beowulf refuses to fight Grendel with a sword and a shield because Grendel doesn't use a sword and a shield. So he is not, he's leveling the playing ground, so to say, even though we think, but Grendel's a monster. He's been, killing these men and doing all sorts of things with him. And Beowulf is just a man. But Beowulf's honor drives him to not even use a sword and a shield when fighting Grendel. So he goes into him in hand-to-hand combat. Now, I kind of emphasize the word he's just a man because Beowulf doesn't see himself as just a man. And he is extremely boastful. He boasts about everything he does. And one of the other characters, and of course I can't remember the character's name now, kind of calls him out on that. You're just really boastful. Well, if it's true, is it really being boastful or is it just being honest? And so that's a question that I suppose we don't have to ask or need to ask. But that's how Beowulf sees it. All of the things that Beowulf talks about, what he has accomplished, what he has done, these wondrous feats, we have to accept that he really did it because we see him fight Grendel, we see him fight Grendel's mother, and he succeeds. So we can doubt that his boasting was not so factual, but we have to accept it at face value. And we in the modern world tend to look down on boasting and being conceited. But in Beowulf's culture, that was an acceptable trait. And not only was it an acceptable trait, it was an advertisement and it was a resume. And when Beowulf says, "This is what I have done, this is all I have accomplished," he's saying to Hrothgar, I am the best person to fight Grendel because I have the best track record. You don't want to, let someone who isn't up to the task go out because that person is only going to be killed. But I've accomplished all of these traits. I'm a great warrior. I am the best one to do this. And so, of course, he proves that he is by beating both Grendel and Grendel's mother. So those are some things to take into account when thinking about the culture. And I'm looking at my notes here, and I don't think I have anything at this point to add to those issues. Just keep in mind that, especially if you're going to be writing about any aspect of interpersonal relationships, the comitatus applies to that. The honor, maybe not, but definitely the comitatus does, and that relationship between the king and his subjects. And if a king is not loyal to his subjects, then he is subject to being overthrown himself. So we see that much later in British history with Charles and the British Civil War and all of that. But I'm going to leave that there. And I think it was Charles. Now, I say something and then I second guess myself, and then I think, oh, these people are going to think I'm so stupid. But at any rate, the British Civil War, which happened much later. I don't have anything else. Oh, Gawain. Yes, I do have something else, and I'm not giving anything away by saying that Gawain, in his presentation, is much different from Beowulf. Christians were expected to be humble. They were expected to show humility. Beowulf doesn't, Gawain does. And at the beginning of the Gawain poem, Gawain says, I am the least warrior here. I am not really fit to do this, stand up to the Green Knight, but I'm going to because of his loyalty to his uncle and his king, same guy, Arthur. All right, I'm finished there. Going to stop, and that's all, folks.